Hey everybody. I'm trying to Hey everybody. I am coming on here live as I promised you that I would do. I am Dr. Torri J, CEO of the Fatherless Generation Foundation, fatherless expert, author, and I'm super exhausted. How about that? I'm gonna tell you the truth tonight. I am super exhausted, but wanted to make sure I came on here tonight to have this discussion with you as we have been talking about, just different things that have come up after interviewing my mother and just really trying to keep the storyline going. And so after the interview with my mother, there was a lot of talk about wholeness and connecting with our parents and having those conversations with our parents. But how do we do that? How do we get in touch with our parents and have that conversation? And then last week, we talked with Dr. Diane Campbell, and we got into healing our past and healing our hearts. And one of the common themes that came up during that conversation was also getting some time alone. How do you literally face your past, which is most times one of our biggest fears? It's one of the things that we fear the most, and we don't want to do it. And there's many reasons as to why we don't want to do it. But the truth of the matter is we have to do it. When we face our past, we are actually walking out an act of purpose. And so what I mean by that is you cannot feel this God-given purpose that you've been blessed to have here on earth without really focusing on the things that have happened to you in your past, from childhood to adulthood, those different things. And what I realized more than anything is when you are operating from a place of trauma and hurt, and then you try to go fulfill purpose and destiny, too often your soul and the pain and the trauma of your soul, or I should say, the trauma within your soul is at the forefront of everything you do. It's like whether you know it or not, when you're speaking, people can hear your trauma. They can see it before you even open your mouth. You speak from the narrative of woe is me versus the narrative of an overcomer. And so I am guilty as charged of doing those things myself, because there are areas in my life that I am healed from and I've overcome and I've been able to walk out. But there are other areas in my life that I am still working on and still learning things about myself and what I need to do. So tonight, I didn't want to bring on some special entity or person. I wanted you guys to be the special guest, and we just kind of have a conversation just really about everything that's going on with you, everything that you have experienced. And maybe there's some questions and there's some answers and we can dialogue back and forth. And then, we've had a few troubles and a few issues with people getting on. So I didn't want to go through that drama today either. And so I just want to talk to you guys about facing your past, dealing with the hurt that you've experienced and how that's impacted you. So I'm going to give you this preface. I'm going to give you this PSA. For the best possible results in facing your past, you got to get with a therapist or a counselor. Like, that is a necessity. They tend to provide the tools that you need as you're digging up these things that are going on within you. Sometimes we can dig up something and it doesn't really phase us as much as we think that it's going to. But then there are things that we hit that send us spiraling out of control. And you want to be able to sit with a therapist who can help you stop the spiral and get things back under control. So one thing that we briefly touched on last week is the fact that in order to get whole, you have to get alone so that you can hear clearly as to who you are. Many of us do not take the time to hear clearly as to who we are. And that even goes into the purpose. You know, the greatest challenge many people have when it comes to knowing their purpose is what they hear in their spirit as far as what they have to do. They don't like it and they don't want to do it. If your purpose is attached to your past, and I know so many people go, well, you don't have to go back into the past. And we say those things, but those things aren't true. You do have to go back into the past and pull things up and dig things out. And so we live in denial thinking this thing isn't attached to our present or our future when it actually is. That thing back there is the very thing holding you back from getting to the next place that you want to walk out. I can honestly tell you right now, I am doing a series of prayers and meditations because there's an area in my life that I'm aware as to where it comes from. I'm just working out what I've been told I need to do in order to dig it up and to get it out of my life. But it's not an easy thing to deal with. It's not an easy thing for me to say, you know what, that inner issue that I have, or that, no, the thing that's happening in the natural for me is that inner issue that I have surrounding this thing. And I have to be able to acknowledge that and go through the process and deal with it. And so let me give you step number one as to how you face your past. You have to start by being alone. You got to get alone. What I mean by this is too many of us find ourselves the busiest when we should be in a place of solace, or solitude, I should say, in a place of solitude. We watching TV, we're on social media, we're on the computer, we under a man, ladies, men, you on top of a woman, or however that goes for you. And we're not going to pretend. There are many of us who throw ourselves into our work or church. You get so caught up in going to church and serving and doing and being that you don't take the time out for yourself. And so when I think about the people that I've run across and the people who have come to me and asked me about things that they're dealing with, what does that look like? How do you go about quieting everything down, getting alone? I can honestly tell you, I have watched people go to church every time the doors are open and they're serving and doing, and it looks good because you're there, but you're not present. And you're not present to hear the message and to hear the word that's coming forth. Because it could be life-changing, transforming for you. However, you're busy serving. And so there are others that go from relationship to relationship, never even being able to build true intimacy with the individuals you're in relationship with, because you have this trauma that has taken place in your past that you are still trying to avoid. You know, as a believer, one of the things that I find very interesting is how we flip scripture for our benefit. What I mean by flipping scripture for your benefit is, one of the ones that I think could go with this is, you know, call those things that be or be not as though they were, right? That's how we say it. Call those things that be not as though they were. We say it really fast. So if I'm cut, but I sit there and say, I'm not cut, and I'm bleeding. So, but I'm saying, in the name of Jesus, I'm healed. In the name of Jesus, I'm healed. Actually, you still cut. Call those things that be, that are in existence, that are actually happening, not as though they were. You can say, I have diabetes, or my finger is cut, or whatever that situation is, but I'm healed in the name of Jesus. But there's still steps that you have to do to get your healing. Too often, hey, babe. Too often, what we tend to do is ignore all of the things that are actually happening to us. Before I jump the gun, because I'm actually jumping the gun a bit, as you are sitting alone, because that's number one, start by being alone. Being alone will open the door for you to hear what you cannot hear with all of the busyness that's around you. So often we get swamped and overwhelmed with work, children, family, just stuff, just busyness. That's why people say, are you busy or are you productive? because many of us are just busy. And we're so busy that it's intended to avoid what's actually happening. We're trying to avoid listening. We're trying to avoid hearing what we don't want to hear. Because one of the things that I learned, because I've done this many times, one of the things that I've learned when I'm alone, when I get alone, is you stay in that lonely place, and it's not a dark place, and it's not lonely. Let me not call it lonely. You stay in that place of being alone as long as you have to, because many of you are going to ask, well, how long do you have to stay by yourself? How long do you need to be in solitude? That is up to you. I learned that you stay there until what I call the walls stop talking, right? There are times you sit alone and you just start thinking and you're hearing stuff and it's just chaos and it's just all this stuff swarming in your mind. Well, what you do is you stay there until that swarming stops. You stay there until you've at least brought some solutions to the table where you're not so caught up in that moment, because that will allow you to calm down. And that is what is called having peace. You don't have peace when your mind is everywhere. You don't have peace when you can't stop thinking and you can't turn it off. And too many of us as adults, we're truly living our lives and going about our daily lives. However, much of the trauma that we're dealing with as adults literally comes from our childhood. And how many of us have tried to have the conversation with someone about what's happened in our childhood? Woe is me. You're playing the violin to the person that you're talking to because you picked the wrong person to talk to. And they're like, you're an adult now. You got to get over it. But we never just get over something. We have to go through the steps that are required in order to heal from something. Just getting over a broken heart doesn't happen. Just getting over childhood trauma, it just doesn't happen. We don't just get over our parents' divorce. We don't just get over a breakup. It takes time, and there's a healing process. And most of that healing process comes from you getting alone. And then, number 2, acknowledging that you're hurt, acknowledging the issue. Many times, like I just said with that scripture, we go around and we pretend like there's nothing happening to us. And we live in a world now, honestly, my husband and I were talking about this. We live in a world now where people just don't care. They ask you how you're doing, and they do not really care how you're doing. They'll ask, just a normal general saying that we have, how are you? And the person will say, I'm fine. I'm blessed and highly favored. That's the one I can't stand. I'm sorry, y'all. You may say that to me and you really might believe that. But because I've heard it in ways that I'm like, they ain't blessed and highly favored. They struggling because you can see it. I struggle with that one. I have a problem with hearing that one. And so when I got on here, what did I tell you? I'm Dr. Torri J. I'm the founder of the Fatherless Generation Foundation. I'm the fatherless expert. I'm this, but I'm exhausted. I am exhausted. And you can see it. See, and even in this, look at this. I'm not saying I look busted and disgusted. No makeup. I think I still have eyeliner on. But however, no foundation. And you can tell that I am tired. You can tell I need to get some rest. That's the same way when you're walking around and you walking around with your trauma. It's like on your sleeve and people can see it. That's why they always ask you, how are you doing? Are you okay? Are you good? Too often we confide in the wrong people. Too often we say, yeah, I'm good. And then when you decide to say, no, I'm not doing so well, it's to the person who you should have never said that to. And so I'm using myself as an example. We have to be honest about where we are and then take the appropriate action to get what we need, get the help that we need. And that's the acknowledgement piece. One of my girlfriends calls it, and I've heard this on, I want to believe it's Ayala Van Zant. It's called owning your truth. What has happened to you in life and how has it manifested negatively in your everyday life, your career, your relationships, even your spiritual journey? How has it blocked you? Hearing my mother in her testimony a few weeks ago, where she said she struggled in her Christianity because if her mother didn't love her, how could God love her? Well, as her daughter, I've witnessed her struggling in her Christianity, but I never knew that it was tied to the love of her mother. I'm curious as to why it wasn't tied to the love of her father, but that's a conversation we started having and will continue to have. But we struggle with different areas in our lives because of what's happened to us in our past. I know we try to go on and we're like, I'm an adult, I'm good, I'm over it, no big deal. But in truth, you are not over it. In truth, you still got a little something in your throat about that situation that happened when you were 10. And let's say this, even if you don't know that you have something in your throat about that situation that happened to you at age 10, by the time you sit with yourself long enough, it will surface and it will bubble to the top. I think one of the craziest things that happens with trauma is they surround themselves with people when they should be alone. They surround themselves with people who do not care about how they feel or what's going on with them. And they surround themselves with people who they never have to build a true intimate relationship with. And it's convenient for all parties. It's convenient for everyone involved, because then you don't have to acknowledge. Then you don't have to own your own truth. At that moment, you don't have to say a word, and you don't have to, talk about how you felt when your parents, got a divorce. Talk about how the trauma that going without your child and having parental alienation take place in your life is affecting you. You don't have to acknowledge how the father of your child, he is not doing what he's supposed to do, and it's frustrating you and it's broken you. You don't have to acknowledge that around people who just don't care, who just don't give a damn, who just don't care how you feel. And they don't want to know anything intimate about you, but they'll hang out with you anytime is a good time, hanging out, going to the party, drinking, whatever that is. But they don't want to get to know you. Those are the kind of people that you have to cut off. And if you sit alone and you begin to acknowledge your truth, I promise you, those are the kind of people who will eventually fall off and fall out of your life. And the more you step into your calling and purpose, people who are not intended to be in your life will eventually go away. Some of them try to blow stuff up on their way out, but most of them will just go away. And so as adults, we're dealing with this trauma from our childhood. We don't know what to do. And most of it has to do with the fact that as children, you don't process the same way as an adult. You're not intended to. You have no idea as to how to do that. One of the things I thought about is when you have to own your truth. Did your parents get a divorce, or did that breakup cause you so much harm that you've built up a wall because you have a hard time trusting someone or anyone else with your heart? You've got to own that. You've got to acknowledge that. Because there's no way that, although I said you have to spend time alone, you are not intended to live life alone. Alone meaning with empty people and shallow people, and alone meaning a hermit, complete solitude, an introvert. That is not how you're intended to live. You're intended to live in a community that embraces you, that loves you through the hurts and pains, and helps you overcome the traumas that you have. I even put on here, were you molested? So it taught you how to be dysfunctional and have dysfunctional ideologies and behaviors towards the same sex who molested you. I couldn't, as I jotted that down, one of the things that hit me is not everybody's molested who's a female by a male, and not every male who's molested is not molested by a female. There are individuals who are molested by same-sex individuals, and now they have a thought process towards that person or this strange affection towards the same sex. Now, we're not going to get into homosexuality because I don't even want y'all to type that in there as to whether it's based on those things or not. But those are things that happen to us that cause us trauma And so as they cause us trauma, we have to deal with them. We have to look at them and say, okay, why do I have this dysfunctional behavior towards individuals that I'm intended to build relationship, whether that's business and whether that's just on a personal, homeboy, homegirl basis, or whether that is through a partner that you want to build a real relationship with. Too often, we don't think about how our childhood has impacted the relationships we have. If you think about the hurt, and I know we don't like to, we don't. But if you think about the hurt that you've been through, and now here I am telling you, you've got to acknowledge it. Many of you have already said, oh no, she tripping. I'm not doing that. There's no way I'm doing it. And the reason you're saying that to yourself is because facing your past causes you to have to revisit the incident. It causes you to have to get a little bit of that incident back into your spirit, and you're almost back there. You have to relive it all over again. But if you've never done it before, what you'll realize is on the other side of it. Let me say that. If you've never done it before, you're afraid. But once you do it, what you'll realize is the very thing that you were fearing, and it was going to take you out and it was going to be so horrible. You'll realize that it was not as bad as you're thinking. Being on the other side of it is so much better than not. Nathan Cruz has come on here. He said it's warrior versus coward. That's very true. Many of us try to cower away from spending that time alone and doing what we need to do. And we just shouldn't. We're better on the other side. And the other side happens to be how we overcome. I will give my PSA once again, but I'm going to give it a little differently. Because some of us are spiritual individuals. We believe in God, a higher power. I'm a Christian. I'm a believer. And I'm going to tell you right now, Jesus plus a therapist equals total healing. Jesus plus your therapist, or whoever, I'm going to throw it out there like that. Whoever you choose to pray to at this point, because I don't want to even get too deep into that part. Because many of you, I believe, will find truth as you start to dig these things up, very much so, like my mother has talked about and is still walking that out. And individuals that I come across, you may be worshiping something now, but I do believe that you will find yourself in a different place spiritually once you dig up these things. And so I'm going to say Jesus plus a therapist has brought total healing into my life. Yes, I have a therapist. And many of you should as well. Too often you don't, because you think, especially Christians, you think Jesus got it all under control, and he does. It's just a different way he got it under control. You will not go to a therapist. You take it to Jesus. You will not go sit alone. You like, Jesus covered it under the blood. And so you keep going about your busy life, not acknowledging a darn thing, and just allowing life to keep beating you up in the face going, why didn't Jesus get that? I thought he had that. Okay, he'll get it next time. And before you know it, you're now mad at God and Jesus because you thought they had your back. They do. And they've placed tools and things on this planet for you to utilize to get your healing. And so I say all of that, just being very candid about how you go about facing your past. We don't want to deal with our stuff. So we hide it under a rock. We hide it under Jesus. We hide it under our careers. We hide it under our families. But how many of us have heard of a midlife crisis? Most times it's associated with men. They go get the sports car, the hot chick, the younger chick, because they're trying to cover up something. That's how in society we talk about that. But it doesn't always come out that way. It can come out from being angry. I've seen the bottom of people's lives fall out where they get a divorce. Their children don't like them anymore, whether that's the mother or the father. And Oh, I'm sorry. I'll look at that in a minute. I'm sorry. It's popping up in the middle of my screen for some reason. And so, you find yourself all in all these different places because you don't want to acknowledge what's happened to you. I believe one of the reasons people really love the interview with my mom, and she will come back on, it was transparent and it was authentic, and we weren't hiding anything. I'm not the type to do that. I'm very candid and very transparent about who I am, what I'm going through. And I think it's important to do that. So, okay, Nathan has said, yeah. So I'm gonna show this one. Learning to assert ourselves, speaking from the spirit of truth, is healing, while simultaneously an uphill battle. Very true. How do you have conflict resolution with yourself, right? That's really what that is. When you have to assert truth into yourself, that's conflict resolution. Most times we think of conflict resolution at the workplace, in your marriage. But when there's a battle happening between you, your mind, your spirit, your body, everything's going nuts, you have to find yourself in a place where you have to assert the truth and acknowledge it. That's conflict resolution. When you're at work, one of the first steps they make you do in conflict resolution is own your part. You got to own your part in this stuff. So I know I'm the founder and CEO of the Fatherless Generation Foundation. One of the things that irks me to no end is when I see two parents, but only one parent has to own all the responsibility for the brokenness of the relationship. One parent has to own all the responsibility of what took place. It's not real. I am married. I've been married I'm still technically a newlywed to many people. But I've been married 4 years, and I can tell you right now, when something is happening with my husband or happening with me, the other person is responsible. And we have to find a way to bring a resolution to the situation that's happening in our household. So when you're saying that, learning to assert ourselves, speaking from the spirit of truth, is healing. Once you can tell yourself the truth, it won't be hard to tell everybody else the truth. And that's the funny part about it. So telling ourselves the truth, because denial is lying to yourself, whether you knew it or not. You lying to yourself. You're not telling yourself the truth. You're not acknowledging the pain that you've gone through in the past and currently in the present. You will not acknowledge it. It did not happen. And let me say this. I know a few different cultures. I happen to be, if you can't tell, I'm African American. I crack myself up. And so one of the things I've learned about my culture is, baby, we will hide a secret, a family secret to no end. Great grandma done dead, but we have hid children grandpa done had. Or I don't know how many of y'all been to a funeral and a child's name show up on the obituary and you go, I don't know them. Because we hide everything. And so we won't tell ourselves the truth. And if we don't tell ourselves the truth, we're not telling anybody else the truth. But the scripture says, when you know the truth, from knowing the truth, it will then set you free. Knowing the truth. Too many of you aren't acknowledging the truth. And even one of the things that came up during the interview with my mom that I wrote down as my bullet points to share with you as well, is you're not sharing the truth with your children. You're not telling your children what took place and what happened to you. Now, there's an appropriate age and appropriate time to tell those things. And most times it's around the age in which it happened to you. If our children, if I'm 11 and I experienced a molestation, I need to probably prep my child in a childlike way to deal with anyone who tries to come their way. You know, we call that stranger danger, right? We don't call it something, but you got to be able to share things with your children so that they know what to look out for. Too often we hide it and we act like it's not happening to our children, and they are experiencing it And they might not be sharing it with you because you've never shared it with them. So acknowledging your truth and owning your truth opens the door for you to tell others the truth. It opens the door for you to then share with your children. Generational curses are real. They are real. And so if you are not sharing with your children about the experiences you've had, let me give you an example. I want to Nathan said, I'm not speaking from my base of knowledge. I'm also speaking from my own personal experiences. Nathan, it's the only way we can really speak. You know, theory doesn't hit the same way as practical and hands-on experience hits. Andrea, good to see you on here, Andrea. She said, yes, ma'am, that big elephant that no one in the family acknowledges. Come on. We got them. We all have them. And so when I deal with clients, this is going to blow y'all mind, I think. Maybe some of the dads on here, because you're on the Fatherless Generation Foundation page, it won't, or it'll open your eyes to something. Many times when I'm on the phone with a dad, because that's typically who calls the office to want to reconnect with their children, he's telling me a story. And how he tells the story, I can hear that thing in his throat about his own father. So then I begin to ask questions about that relationship. And he will then either say, yeah, I later learned that my dad went through the very same thing with my mom that I'm now going through. Or he'll say something like, after I reveal it to him and I have that, like I start to pull on him, he'll go, man, I never thought about it that way. If you're not sharing with your children what you've been through, they are going to repeat the cycle. Trauma is cyclical. Y'all can go on and type that in, because that's definitely a Twitter Googleable moment. Trauma is cyclical. It's generational. It's intergenerational. It happens over and over and over again. We jokingly say, you know, at church, the devil don't have no new tricks. So if he doesn't have any new tricks, why aren't you sharing with your children the things that you've endured and the things that have happened to you so that they can avoid those landmines? But instead, you don't acknowledge it. So therefore you can't share it. And then they step on the same landmine. And even after they stepped on the landmine, you still don't tell them. And if they had someone that showed them how to acknowledge the truth, maybe then they wouldn't repeat that cycle of being quiet, holding it all in, keeping it in. You know what happens when we keep something in, we keep stuffing it down and stuffing it down? There's only so much stuffing you can do. It's eventually going to pop. So when you guys see all these kids running around here, these millennials, and they've popped, well, that's because you taught them to stuff down their feelings, because that's one of the biggest things that comes with facing your past. You have to, in the midst of acknowledging your truth, it's owning your feelings. Yeah, it's owning your feelings. And if you're not owning your feelings, you'll appear to be robotic. It's why many fatherless children wander around having lots of sex, but no intimacy. Because there's no feeling attached to sex. There's no feeling attached to just hooking up with somebody. I learned a couple years ago that there were these different groups on the internet. Friends were talking about it and cracking up. I think we were at the Jazz Festival, and they're like, oh yeah, they call it cuffing. And there's this no cuffing thing that people were doing. And so what that meant was no commitment. I'm having sex with you, but there's no commitment. Let me tell you something, fellas. Ain't no chick able to do that for a long period of time. She eventually gonna get feelings, and then you gonna have to shake her loose, and it's gonna create more chaos. And God forbid she gets pregnant, and now you got a baby with a chick that you wasn't trying to be committed to. And so now you find yourself in a cyclical cycle or cyclical behavior, because if you looked at the situation with your parents, you would probably find out that maybe your mama and daddy did the exact same thing. I know you don't want to look at them that way because they're your mama and daddy, but we have to stop and realize our parents are people. They're beyond superheroes, and they are people. Nathan says, yes, trauma breeds the same or worse cycle being repeated. And that's true, because that thing, once it's in one generation, it speeds up for the next. It can definitely become worse for the next generation. And so now your children are dealing with something 10 times worse than you ever dealt with, because you never shared. You never shared. Nathan also said, hold on. Yeah. Trauma is also one of the leading causes of mental illness. This is the root cause of our current society. Nathan is on it tonight. Nathan, I thank you for being on here and chiming in. Because in truth, we don't think about trauma like that. You know what? Something happens to us and we keep it moving. And that has to do with the fact that we are still, a lot of us who are fatherless, who have not gained our total healing. I'm going to say us, because I once was fatherless as well. We don't process the same way, because in truth, we didn't get the full, we didn't get the full function of what was happening, because we were children when it was going on. So a child's brain is not at its fullest capacity. It's not rational. And so it doesn't have the ability to process like adults process. So when something takes place or trauma is happening, there are times even as children, you don't process that till way later. And even the coping skills that children have are very limited, because their worldview is so myopic that they don't know what one thing is from the next. And as children, our coping skills are self, how should I put this? They're self-centered. I'm gonna say it that way. They're self-centered. And the reason I say self-centered is because of this. When our parents get a divorce or our parents break up, right? Who do we blame? Us. As kids, it was my fault. Daddy left because of me. And we believe that until as adults, we finally get the healing we need and we walk into rational thinking, either with the help of a friend listening, preferred therapist, counselor, listening, who can help walk us through that wisdom and understanding. I remember having a young lady in my peer groups at the Boys and Girls Club, and she would be in the class and she'd be the type who would out-talk and over-talk everyone. And I'd have to say, hey, you got to give somebody a chance to talk. You got to give somebody else a chance to talk. And she would just keep interrupting. She'd be like, they're not listening to me. They're not listening to me. They're not listening. And I'm like, okay, calm down. And my spidey sense, my spiritual sense kicked in. And I said, that's more than they're not listening to her. And I said, I'm going to help you with that. And a week went by and I came back to the Boys and Girls Club and she was doing it again. And I still hadn't helped her. I still hadn't taken the time out to help her. And she was like doing it again. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm going to help you with that. The next week she was like, Miss Torri, you told me you were going to help me with this. So I eventually pulled her into the room. I looked her in her face and I said, the reason you want everyone to listen to you is because when your parents got a divorce, you wanted to tell them you didn't want them to get a divorce, but you didn't say anything. She screamed like someone had stabbed her. This is, at the time, this was like an 8-9-year-old little girl. She screamed like she just, it was something that was just like something was taking over her, and she just screamed, and everyone around the Boys and Girls Club, the adults knew what was going on because I told them what was going to happen, that I was going to minister to her. And I ended up rocking this little girl in my arms, holding her and getting her to a place where she was able to deal with it. And I will never forget, I think it was a session later, so it probably was a half a school year later, there was another young lady who had been her enemy previously. An enemy meaning, we had to put them in separate groups in order for them to even be in the peer group, because they would try to out-talk each other. You shut up. Oh, no, you shut up. Is that bickering back and forth between, young ladies. And she realized the young lady was coming to me for some help surrounding the very thing that she needed help with. And she grabbed me and she said, Miss Torri, I got this. I'm going to help her. And she taught her what I taught her, and helped the young lady. So when you tell the truth and you teach a child how to deal with their truth, they're able to take that same tool and help someone else. So I want to delve into some of these comments. Andrea said, so true. My mother was fatherless and she didn't know she was fatherless until this year when I told her. Wow. Although her father was a married man whom she never met or never spent time with or bonded with, same trauma as myself and now my children. My children are in the know, and I inject healing. It's a work in progress, but they are getting there. Come on now, Andrea, come on. Now that's true. And that's one of the things that I say. People don't want to hear it, but I do believe with everything in me that fatherlessness is a mental health issue. Why? Because it's traumatic. And I don't only believe that fatherlessness is a mental health issue, I believe it creates one. Andrea just gave you 3 generations, boom, 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 back to back to back, who've experienced trauma based on being fatherless. Her mother was clueless, didn't know, didn't acknowledge it. And it's very weird because I even did that little video recently where I said, so many, there are millions of you who need to connect with the Fatherless Generation Foundation, but you won't because connecting with us makes you acknowledge the pain that you've endured on your fatherless journey. And what Andrea just said, like her mother didn't even get it. He was a married man. She didn't spend no time with him. She ain't bonded, but she never connected the fact that she was fatherless because if I acknowledge it, now I got to deal with the stigma. If I acknowledge it, now I've got to deal with the trauma. Thank you for sharing that, Andrea, because that's powerful. And I love the fact that you're like, I'm injecting healing into my children. I know my mother messed up. And because my mother did what she did, I did what I did, thinking it was okay, thinking that it was going to be fine, or maybe not thinking it was okay, but was like, we'll be okay. We'll get over it. And you realize once you're in it, it's more traumatic than you would have ever imagined. Nathan said, I love a lot of the mentorship you provide primarily for the ladies. Female warriors are desperately short supply and a requirement to rebuild. Thanks, Nathan. When it comes to the female part, this is something that my mother really kicked off. We have been child-centered and father-centered for a very long time with the Fatherless Generation Foundation. And I think one of the reasons I didn't want to tap into it is because I'm not a single mom. And I don't think I can really help single moms if I've never experienced that. So I was blessed to be able to ask my mother to come on and share her journey and her story. And now we have a different spin on things. Not to say that some mamas ain't holding their children back and playing the pawn game. Not to say that fathers are all doing what they're supposed to do. My goal is to help the family. My goal is to provide resources and services to family members to not only help support and provide, successful tools to overcome the challenges they have, but also to elevate that conversation about fatherhood and father involvement. We are not giving fathers enough credit for the role that they honestly play in our lives. We believe men and male figures, we believe our baby daddies, and I don't have any children, so not me, but women in general. We believe our baby daddies are unnecessary. And that's just what it is. But then we'll go get another man to mentor our children or to marry us and raise our children. And that becomes really challenging because no one's perfect and no one should ever have to pay their entire lives for a bad decision. I have dads who call me, they haven't been a part of their children's lives for 10, 15 years. And I know some of you would be like, well, why would you do that? Why would you let them reunite with their children? Well, most of them, number one, have been paying child support from day one. They're on a child support order. And number two, where's your grace and your compassion? It's best that people get it right before they die or they're on their deathbed. Because imagine being a child who never meets their father, who never spends time bonding with their father. He dies, and now he dies with all the answers that they need. I was able to be reunited with my father. For those of you, you know the work that I do, but maybe you don't know my story. I was able to be reunited with my father at 31 years old, and being reunited with him, I got to spend 2.5 years with him before he passed on from diabetes complications. It's one of the reasons why our organization has partnered with the American Diabetes Association, and we do the Father of the Year Award with ADA every year. They've even given us the Community Dad Award, where we get to help nominate and go through the whole process of nominating fathers to be community dad, because I think it's very important to acknowledge my father and leave a legacy for him. I'm leaving a legacy for my mama. That's clearly done. But I want to also leave one for my father and my mother together. They may not have been together like that, but I think it's necessary to leave that. Let me see what Andrea says. Yes, our society has taken the value of fathers and their role in the mental and physical development of children. I know firsthand because I couldn't be whole until I learned a name at the age of 30. Ooh. I think I'm saying it right, Andrea or Andrea. I'm gonna tell you right now, when you don't know who your father is, when you don't know, then you don't know who you are. Tell you a story. So before I started the Fatherless Generation Foundation, I was going to school for chemistry, done those things, but I was still missing something. And I loved ministry. I loved helping people. I loved ministry. I loved that. So I was going to train to be a minister in a different country, and found myself coming back and writing my mother the letter, trying to find out who my dad is and all of those things. And I knew there was a man that was around previously. And, that was tough because it's like, I don't know who I am. I'm looking at my family. No one's ministering. At the time, there were no ministers. So this natural thing that I love and I have a feel for, I don't know anybody doing it other than the pastor of the church that I grew up in. Well, I meet my father and I realize after meeting him, there are so many pastors, preachers, bishops, so on and so forth in this family that during the family reunion, they draw from a hat, or it's like this cyclical thing that they choose out of a hat who's going to minister in each town that the family reunion travels between 5 different cities. And they pick who's going to minister based on that city and who hasn't ministered. And so when I met my father, I was like, oh, that's a real thing. Like I get this from you. I don't get this from my side of the family. So if you don't know who your daddy is, there are parts of you that are operating that seem very foreign to you. So you don't know what to do. You don't know if that's a good thing, a bad thing. You don't know if you keep it or if you leave it. You don't know what you're doing. And my father gave me my identity. My father gave me what it is that I needed. And so when Andrea says that, she was like, I couldn't really be who I needed to be until I found out a name. Now, Andrea, I don't know if you're just saying that you only found out a name, but I'm hoping that you would step into going beyond finding out a name and actually attaching that to a face and an identity and maybe a group of people. And hey, if your dad isn't around anymore, I'm sure there are siblings and aunts and uncles who might want to know who you are. It's amazing as to how I still have relationship with my stepmom and my older brother. That will never change. And the other thing is when people come back or come around or you're introduced into this family, this is my nugget before I go to number 3. Only embrace those who embrace you. Because some people will try to make you feel like that illegitimate child that you feel like. They'll shun you. They won't even participate in conversation with you. That happened. And even when I'm talking about ministry, and the Fatherless Generation Foundation, although it's a nonprofit, it is a ministry first. This is intended to heal hearts and deliver captive and turn hearts of fathers back to their children. So it's doing multiple things that are biblical and scriptural based. And I just need you guys to know that. But when I met my father and saw all of that, I was like, wow, that's impressive. So this year I ended up going to the family reunion in my father's hometown. So I got to see the high school he went to, the church that the family built, all these different things. And when I asked the question, because I was at the family graveyard, so I asked this question, well, how long has the family been ministering? And to come to find out, my father's side of the family, they were pastors during slavery. That blew my mind. And so if they were pastors during slavery, I'm assuming that there was some spiritual connection, even as they came across the waters into slavery. And so you guys got to know that there's parts of you that are attached to your father. And you have to, going back to number 2, you have to be able to acknowledge that. You got to be able to own that part of your truth. Nathan, I see you were saying here, hold on, I got to pull this back up. Men overall are viewed by the large majority as disposable. Sends the message to our children to hate half of themselves. They are part of each parent from conception. Come on, Nathan. And that's why you have so many boys angry. That's why you have so many boys angry. Because mamas, you have told your sons so much negative stuff about his father. If I come from that, then am I that? You can't tell a child that much negative stuff about his daddy and then think that he doesn't think that he's that thing, like his daddy. How do you do that to a child? You can't do it. Andrew, you said, yes, I did find out I had a brother with the same, with the same fatherless experience. So your dad wasn't there for either one. Wow. And that's, I wish we were around back then, because we would have got that straightened and taken care of. So let's go to number 3. Get closure. I'm going to go back to what I talked about earlier. You got to tell your children the truth. Because if you don't tell them the truth as children, they're going to come back to you as adult children. And they're going to need to know. So I wrote my mama a letter. That's one of the ways you get closure. You write a letter to the person who you need to get the closure with. When I had been given the names of the 2 men, I called one. He still wants to be my daddy. He's so sweet. Even going home this past summer, and he came over to my mom's and he met my husband, and he looked like the proud papa standing there meeting my husband for the first time. It was hilarious. But at the end of the day, he's not my daddy, but he's always been a father figure to me. But the father, the man who ended up being my father, I wrote him a letter, sent it in the mail, and unbeknownst to him, he gives me a call responding to my letter on my 31st birthday. He didn't even know it was my birthday, y'all. He didn't even know. He learned quickly that it was. And that was for me, that was that aha moment. And that was how I ended up getting my closure. Because writing that letter, as nervous as I was, writing the first letter to my mother, as nervous as I was writing the letter to my potential father, getting on the white pages online and finding his address and sending him a letter. He could have called and said whatever. I don't know what he was going to say. But he got on the phone and he said, yes, I'm your father, so on and so forth. And I've always believed that. And for many of you who will find your father, because that's my prayer for you, you will find your father. And when you find your father, I don't want you to take it for face value. I want you to get DNA tests. I want you to get a paternity test. I got a paternity test. 99.963%. That man is my daddy. And you can't take that from me. Cannot take that from me. And I remember walking into that house the first day, meeting him as my father. And my father was blind by the time I met him. But one of the things that I will never forget is hearing him whisper to my stepmom, does she look like me? And my stepmom said, yes, she has your smile. First time in my life that my identity, my physical presence, because for those of you who know my mama, and y'all saw my mama, we look a lot alike. So when people see me, girl, you look just like your mama. But now I can say, well, yeah, but I look like my daddy too. Before I couldn't say that. And my mother and father look a lot alike. They do. They look a lot alike. So as you're getting this closure, let's say the person that you need to write the letter to has passed on. You write the letter anyway. You don't withhold writing the letter because they've passed on. Another awesome way to get healing that we teach our children in peer groups is emotional healing through journaling. It is so awesome to be able to journal and just write without stopping, just writing all, Andrea said, all tears, because you know my mama. But, the journaling and not filtering what you write, it gets it out of you and puts it on the paper. And that's how you can really find the healing in moments where there are no people around anymore to get that healing. And so I want to make sure I cover these very well. Number one, you got to get alone so you can hear. You got to cut out all the clutter and all the noise. Number two, you got to own your truth, acknowledge what has happened to you and how did this happen to you? Sometimes we need to know the how. My husband always teases me. He's like, you always want to know why. I do. It's part of my chemistry background, my scientific background. I know there's an answer. Even someone saying on our Facebook a while ago, when I asked, how do you overcome fatherlessness? How can we solve the problem? And the person was like, it's unsolvable. Like, it's not something you can solve. And I'm like, no, question begets answer. Problem begets solution. And so for many of you who watch me, my prayer for you is that you will have that connection with your father if you don't have it already. And let's say you know who your father is. He wasn't the most engaged. My prayer for you tonight is that you will begin to find siblings and aunts and uncles and things of that nature that you can bond with to have that connection. Because even for Andrea, she has a brother now who's had the same experience. And hopefully there's a place that they can bond and get to know each other from that place. And then still reach back and find maybe someone on the dad's side that can open up their eyes to who their dad was beyond the negative conversation, beyond the fact that he wasn't there. Who was he as a person? And what you'll learn is your dad and you have so much more in common than you actually know. And so the third thing is to get closure. And getting closure is you've got to write these things down. You got to write a letter to the person you need the closure with or from. And then journaling, emotional healing through journaling. And I'm going to add number 4, Jesus plus therapy equals your total healing from your past. I have totally enjoyed my conversation with you tonight. I got work to do because I got to get on the road tomorrow. I'm so tired and I got to get some sleep. But I am so grateful that I get to have this conversation with you tonight. And I enjoyed all of your comments and all of the things that you had to say about your situation. Thank you so much for being transparent and open and sharing your journey and also your experiences and the life lessons that you've made. Writing is, oh yeah, I like that one. We're going to leave with that one. Writing is cathartic. Yes, it is. It is a beautiful thing. And let me say this. Some of y'all, you have a story in your belly. And the reason you won't write it is because what Andrea said earlier. It's that big elephant in the room and you're afraid if you share it, folks going to be mad. Let me tell you something. Folks going to be mad anyway. So write your story. Share it, because when you share it, you bring healing to others. I'm Dr. Torri J. Evans-Barton, founder and CEO of the Fatherless Generation Foundation. And it was truly an honor to talk to you guys tonight. I'll see you next Tuesday. Bye.